I will now give the floor to Mr. Mark Lowcock. Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. I will focus today on 5 areas. Firstly, COVID-19. Second, the humanitarian impact of the economic crisis in Syria. Third, the protection of civilians. Fourth, humanitarian access. And lastly, our assessment of the humanitarian situation as a whole as 2020 draws to a close. Mr. President, the number of reported COVID-19 cases in Syria continues to rise, though limited testing in all parts of the country makes the extent of the outbreak impossible to assess with any certainty. Bed occupancy rates of 100% are being reported in Sweida, Homs and other governorates, but we also know that many people who are sick are reluctant to seek inpatient treatment. The number of reported cases in schools, which are often overcrowded and often suffer poor or damaged infrastructure, more than tripled during November. WHO and UNICEF are working with education providers to strengthen COVID-19 preventive action in schools. Beyond the immediate health impact, we're extremely worried about the secondary effects of the pandemic, including on access to education. Analysis recently by Save the Children found that an estimated 2/3 of children in northern Syria are now out of school. Apart from COVID-19, teachers say that children are dropping out because of rising poverty. And that brings me to my second point, Mr. President, the impact of the economic crisis. As my deputy told you last month, even subsidized prices of essentials have surged. Prices of subsidized bread have doubled, of subsidized diesel have more than doubled since September. Both remain in short supply, and reports continue of long queues at bakeries and petrol stations. The market price of a standard reference food basket is higher now than at any point since price monitoring by WFP began in Syria in 2013. More than 80% of displaced families across the country now say that their income does not cover their needs. Families in which women are the primary breadwinner are even worse off. They make 30% less on average in terms of their income than other displaced families. The impact all this is having on the most vulnerable is clear from the data. In the Northwest, child stunting increased by 5% this year. We now estimate that 34% of children, more than 1 in 3 under the age of 5 in Northwest Syria, suffer from stunting. In areas of displacement in the Northwest, up to 37% of mothers are also malnourished. My next point, Mr. President, is the protection of civilians. I'm sure Gair will cover this in more detail, but hostilities have been continuing in northern Syria in recent weeks, putting civilians at risk in the northwest and increasingly in areas such as Ain Issa. We all know the immediate and devastating human cost of military escalation in Syria. I echo the Secretary General's calls and the Special Envoy's calls for a nationwide ceasefire. Mr. President, infrastructure that is indispensable to civilian survival must also be protected. A Luke water station again stopped pumping water on 3 December as a result of a disruption in the power supply to the station. That's the 15th disruption this year, and it affects almost 500,000 people in Al-Hasaka, forcing them to resort to potentially unsafe alternative sources of water. Humanitarian organizations, in fact, are trucking over 2,000 meters cubed of water to the area every day and are working to scale that up further. But that is neither enough nor sustainable. So, a solution must be found to try to ensure uninterrupted water supply from a Luke. And in the meantime, safe access to the water and electricity installations must continue for the technical teams. Turning to the northwest, water shortages also continue to be reported in Al-Bab city and surrounding areas, affecting 185,000 people. Electricity from Turkish providers last month increased pumping at local wells, but supply is still far short of needs. Water supply from the Ain el-Baida pumping station to Al-Bab could meet these needs and should immediately resume. Mr. President, my next point is humanitarian access. In October, a humanitarian organization delivering WFP food assistance in northeast Syria was instructed by the Syrian government to stop distributing food aid to around 222,000 people in a non-government controlled area of Al-Raqqa governorate. Distributions to all those areas were able to resume earlier this month after a 2-month disruption. Also in the northeast, in late November, local authorities suspended operations of the Syrian Arab Red Crescent in Al-Hol and Al-Roj camps, which together accommodate, as you know, 65,000 people. And that disrupted food distribution, waste management activities, as well as some health services. SARC activities did resume on 1 December. But these incidents exemplify how vulnerable humanitarian operations in the northeast are to disruption. When aid is suspended, those most in need are the ones who suffer, and that suffering is needless. International humanitarian law requires that all parties allow and facilitate the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief for civilians in need. Also in Al-Hol, 3 children died in a fire at the camp last week, reportedly caused by a kerosene cooker. This tragic incident again underscores the challenging conditions at Al-Hol. It is simply no place for children, tens of thousands of children, to grow up. Tent fires usually increase in the winter as families try to keep warm with whatever means are available to them. So unfortunately, we have to expect more such incidents in the coming months. Mr. President, as another year comes to an end, families in Syria remain without respite after almost a decade of conflict. Millions have been displaced and impoverished. Millions have suffered trauma and deep personal loss. Even as active conflict in some areas has subsided, economic decay and the compounding impact of COVID-19 are driving deterioration in people's life experiences. Food insecurity and malnutrition are expected to rise significantly, as is the overall number of people in need of humanitarian assistance. An escalation of hostilities would be all the more devastating against that backdrop. As we've briefed you for the last couple of months, one immediate concern is getting winter assistance to families as temperatures are now dropping. Distributions are underway with plans to reach over 3 million people identified as those most in need. Current funding, however, will only allow us to reach 2.3 million of those 3 million. I thank the donors who are supporting this effort, but more is needed. Thank you, Mr. President.